Hey, so we're going to be looking at searching for etiology of tendinopathy. In this case, the example we use is tennis elbow. It's easy, it's well understood by everybody, so we don't have to worry about basic information, so we can just get on with the tendinopathy search. We'll also do a review of diagnosing what a tendinosis is, tendinopathy is as far as tendinitis, tendinosis, and also reviewing the diagnosis and basically differentiating between the two. And then we'll look in general at an etiology for each of those conditions, and then we'll look at the search for an etiology of a tennis elbow. So a quick review, tendinopathy. Now we're going to concentrate on tendinitis and tendinosis and not include things like tenosynovitis, peritendinitis and so on. These are the two we're going to concentrate on. These are the ones that we see most often. Tenosynovitis is, and peritendinitis are often caused by friction. Tenosynovitis may be caused by infections and also systemic conditions. We're not going to bother with these two. We're going to talk about tendinitis, tendinosis. So, tendinitis, EIS this is much worse than a tendinosis. The pain is severe. There's obligate functional loss. They can't use that tendon, they just can't use it. If it's in the lower limb, they'll limp rather than walk. They won't be able to grip things, they won't be able to move the shoulder properly. They won't be able to do particular functions because of the pain. Palpating the tendon is dead easy. You don't even have to get near it, and it's painful. This is exquisite tenderness. And on isometric testing, you have painful weakness on with that test, and if you stretch the tendon, then you'll get spasm. These tests are mild. If you don't have to apply a lot of force to the isometric, minimal contraction in the neutral position is generally enough to elicit fairly severe pain. Any more than that, and then you'll get the painful weakness coming up. If we're looking at causes for tendinitis, unfamiliar severe overuse. This isn't, oh, I decided to work on my bike today. This is, I worked on my bike all day, or I painted the house in a single weekend. It's a 12,000 square foot house. That type of thing. This is something unfamiliar and severe. And the pain will come on relatively quickly from that, not immediately by any means, but it will come on within hours, at latest next morning. It can also be caused by direct trauma. This causes inflammation. There's your tendinitis. And of course, there's disease and such as ankylosing spondylitis, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes can do it, gout can do it, and certainly infections can do much the same thing. Now, included in this can also be a mechanical cause if it's acute enough. That is, if it's bad enough or short enough, so frictions, a friction rub on this. And I know you're thinking of impingement syndrome, but anywhere where the tendon can be frictioned. But this is unfamiliar, and it's going to be really difficult to prove. The way you can prove frictions, whether it's tendinitis or tendinosis, or semi-prove it rather, is to have no history of trauma for tendinitis, no other joints affected for systemic problems, and no blunt trauma. And then when you go and look for hidden etiologies, you can't find them. So one possibility is that this is a friction problem. This also applies to tendinosis. So really, friction, tendinitis, tendinosis is an exclusionary diagnosis. And that also goes along with external overuse, where the patient doesn't have a history of severe unfamiliar overuse, but they're doing their job the same as they've always done. They may have been away for a while and come back to it. But generally speaking, there's a good reason for a tendinitis and not a terribly good reason for a tendinosis. So if you're not seeing that history of unfamiliar overuse, you're not seeing other joints affected, there's no blunt trauma, then you could be allowed up to a point of saying that the tendinitis has been caused either by friction or by the overuse they're complaining of. Just make sure it's not a medical condition though. Tendinosis, incomplete healing. So they've had an injury to the tendon, usually traumatic, and it's just not healed properly. So you've got probably scarring and adhesions in there, and it's just not healing, so it turns chronic, and this is now tendinosis. Or it's caused by degeneration of the tendon. And this is what we see with the patients we're talking about. Oh, excuse me. Basically, you can break this down into a couple of causes for degeneration. One is long-term frictioning, another one is long-term overuse, but mostly it's about weakness of the muscle, leaving the tendon vulnerable to degeneration, or structural weakness of the tendon, such as with axoplasmic flow problems, leading that to degeneration. Or is an overuse, but an internal overuse, such as with the abducted ulna, was making the muscle contract more strongly than it should do because the proprioception coming from the wrist is insufficient for the muscles, for the central nervous system, and so the muscles contract more to get more extension. So EIS and general etiologies of tendinopathies. So etiology of a tendinitis in a little different format. We've got the diagnosis, common extensor tendon tendinitis. So do we have a history of trauma or extreme overuse? No. Then it may well be systemic disease, and you're probably better off referring it out, particularly if you have a history of other tendon problems or joint problems. If the answer is there is a history of this, and you have a history of recurrent arthritis or enthesitis, again, refer that out. It may be that the tendon is particularly vulnerable to inflammatory changes with trauma because of the disease process. If the answer to that is no, then you've got a local common extensor tendinitis. But always err on the side of basically more investigation rather than less. Where does friction come into this? It's when it doesn't fit anything else, because it's really going to be difficult for you to prove friction. How do you prove that the tendon is being rubbed under the acromion or somewhere else? You really can't. So it's an exclusionary diagnosis. Disprove everything else. That's what you're left with. Then fire it out. And then to review tendinosis. Okay, so we've basically got three major causes. Overuse, which is actually a mixture of overuse and neurophysiological problems. This is now internal overuse. So an abducted ulcer or flexion subluxation of the carpals, limited wrist extension. Again, that altered proprioception could make the muscle overwork to try and gain the extension it truly thinks it needs. Weakness of the tendon. So neurophysiological, this could be segmental facilitation or reflex inhibition, or it could be neurological, either a radiculopathy or a neuropathy, either a single crush or a multiple crush, and this could be a problem with the fast or slow flow axoplasmic compromise, or of the electrical conduction compromised by compression, torsion, twisting, and so on. Or it could be purely mechanical, so frictioning or simple overuse that you wouldn't consider to be unfamiliar, that's ended up in a tendinosis. Again, these last two really are exclusionary diagnoses, so don't make them till you have to. Okay, so we're going to look at the etiology search for common extensor tendinosis. Now, this is one way of doing it. It's the way I suggest, simply because you don't really want to go wobbling things until you know whether there's a neurophysiological problem present. So find the neurophysiological changes before you alter them by wobbling, either deliberate or non-deliberate. So looking at the causes of this again, just one bit quickly: overuse and weak wrist extensors. And I've left out friction and overuse because these are exclusionary diagnoses. So our first box, my first step would be to look at the strength of the muscles within the C5, 6, possibly 7 segments, and seeing what we can find there. If they're weak, you look for the distribution of type. So this could be segmental non-fatigable, which would suggest segmental facilitation. Segmental and fatigable, suggesting a radiculopathy. either a soft radiculopathy in the form of axoplasmic flow problems, or a hard one where there's electrical conduction loss. Or this could be non-segmental and fatigable, which would suggest a neuropathy. This may be multi-crush or single crush. At the other end of the box, you've got non-segmental but non-fatigable. So I've left that box open for you to see if you can fill it. If you can think of something to put in there, do so. It's a really good exercise to make you think about this. So if the other three boxes of one of them or more of them is there, then we can come down, find the cause of whatever that is, and we have our etiology. Now, if there is no weakness in those muscles, then we can move on to the next step, which is eccentric strength testing from an end of range. Now, you're doing this because routine isometric testing is not likely to show this type of weakness. So you need to break this weakness from the end of range. So if we get breaking weakness, then it's reflex inhibition. We do a biomechanical examination of the elbow and the wrist, and now any biomechanical dysfunction will do, simply because it doesn't have to be an overuse thing. It's just got to weaken those muscles. So this could be a flexion hypomobility of the wrist, or any sort of hypomobility of the wrist can lead to reflex inhibition, in which case again we have our etiology. If it's normal, then again, what could be causing that? All right, that's up for you, up for grabs there. Also, if one of these are, when we looked at the segmental and peripheral problems, how did those causes come about? Okay, so find the cause. How are you going to find them? Okay, and then if the biomechanical exam is negative, if the eccentric contraction is negative, you come on to the biomechanical exam of the elbow and the wrist, and you're looking for an abducted ulnar and a wrist hypomobility into extension. These are direct mechanical causes, or at least with a little bit of neurophys thrown in, but these are fairly direct mechanical causes of this. But of course, they can also cause reflex inhibition. Now, if everything's normal, there's your yellow box again. What is the etiology? Okay, so I'm going to leave you to fill those three yellow boxes in, even if it's with only, I have no idea whatsoever. Okay, but they're your boxes. There you go. Everything you want to know about tendinosis, or tendinopathy anyway. Not. You're going to get this again and again and again before this program's finished. All right, guys, have a good day. Bye.